Are arguments evidence? This is what we're going to look at. Deconverted Man made a response to one of my videos, and he said, many apologists that I've heard tend to think that arguments are evidence. They're not. So his claim is arguments are not evidence. They do not provide evidential support. And I disagree with this. I think this is categorically wrong and misguided. So we're going to address this question. But I also think maybe I'm misunderstanding the claim, because to me this seems so obviously wrong that I feel like I may be misunderstanding what's being said here. So let's look at some definitions of evidence. Merriam-Webster defines evidence as an outward sign, something that furnishes proof, and or one who bears witness. And if you're Bayesian or Bayesian epistemologist, this is usually the formulation that you would see. This is what Emerson Green uses. And I like this as well, right? E is evidence for H if and only if the probability of H conditioned on E is greater than the probability of H. So when we're claiming that arguments provide evidential support or arguments are evidence, we don't mean this in the sense that arguments are, exactly equal to evidence in every case. It's necessary and sufficient for, an argument to be evidence, but arguments are a form of evidence. So I'm going to defend two claims in this short video. The first claim, arguments are a form of evidence, and claim number two, the presentation of evidence is always implicitly an argument. So let's go ahead and get started. The claim that we want to address here is arguments do not provide evidential support. Let me give an example. Suppose I make a claim that mortals die, and I want to ask, will Socrates die? Or what is the probability of Socrates dying, let's say? Premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, therefore Socrates is immortal. Wouldn't we say that this argument provides evidential support to the argument Socrates has or will die? I think the fact that we can provide this argument would give us a reason to shift our evidential support in favor of Socrates dying if we accept the claim mortals die. This is the part I don't understand when people say arguments are not evidence, that arguments can be used to make an evidential case, because if people agree with the premises and the conclusion comes out supporting one side or another, then you're going to accept the conclusion. Now, arguments obviously don't necessarily cause things in themselves to be more probable, in the sense that me giving you this argument doesn't affect the underlying probability of Socrates dying, but it often increases our reason for thinking something is true. So this is the distinction between ontology and epistemology. Me giving you a reason to believe something may shift your probability judgment of thinking something is true, or may change your idea of belief. Our arguments can be used to persuade somebody of a certain belief, even if the argument itself doesn't have any indication on the truth of this. And this is the same as any sort of evidence, right? Empirical evidence. My providing evidence doesn't make the underlying event itself more likely to be true, but it may make reasons for believing it better. You may believe that Colonel Mustard stabbed Jane in the in the library with the bloody knife, but if I provide you with the bloody knife with his fingerprints on it, that provides more reasons for believing that this is true. The other thing, if we look at this claim, our syllogism will have previously established Socrates has or will die as proof. And thus, by Webster's definition, this counts as evidence because it furnishes the proof of a statement given the premises. Also, if we look at the Bayesian version of this, the probability of H conditioned on E being greater than H, we can even make this argument in terms of the Bayesian version, right? So suppose I estimate the probability of Socrates' death, given what I had previously, as P naught. It makes sense for me to update the probability to P1 strictly greater than P naught if I accept the previous syllogism. So if the argument provides evidential support for my accepting a proposition, then of course it's going to present as evidence. And this is the part I don't understand. To the naturalist that claims that arguments are not evidence, do they accept the fact that providing an argument for naturalism on the basis of, naturalistic explanations for, let's say, religious belief is not evidence for naturalism? I mean, is that what they're saying? I mean, this is why I don't understand the claim that arguments are not evidence. What I'm trying to say here is arguments can provide evidential support and thus evidence for a claim, especially if you take the Bayesian version of this. Now, of course, this is conditional on the argument actually being valid and a sound argument. But if you estimate that the argument succeeds, or you give it a certain probability of success, like, I estimate premise 1 is true with the probability of 1/2, then of course it's still going to provide evidence for the claim. Lastly, let's move on to my second claim, which is presenting evidence is always an argument. Pretty strong claim. But evidence is always presented in the context of an implicit argument. And this is what the argument goes like. Premise 1. If evidence E exists, the probability of H conditioned on D is greater than the probability of H conditioned on not E. Premise 2. E exists. I am presenting you with the evidence that you need for premise 1. And conclusion, therefore, the probability of H conditioned on E is greater than the probability of H, or greater than the probability of H before you had knowledge about E's existence. What I'm trying to say here, in other words, is the presentation of evidence is always in the context of an argument for a given proposition. Although, of course, this proposition could be trying to move you away from certainty on another proposition. It could be, oh, here's a possible thing. You may accept this position, but here's evidence that there could be another explanation for this, which may cause you to reevaluate your belief. So the conclusion you want somebody to accept may not be a conclusion. It may be your conclusion is like wrong, or your conclusion is too strong, or something like that. But in any case, the presentation of evidence has a specific goal, which is usually to establish evidential support for a certain conclusion. In fact, probably always the case. Otherwise, why are you presenting the evidence? You don't just say, here's this thing. It's like, no, here's this thing, and it supports this argument. So evidence is in the context of an argument. An argument can provide evidence for certain propositions, but the presentation of evidence is in and of itself an argument. So thanks for watching. Am I just misunderstanding this? Because to me, the claim that arguments don't provide evidence is just so obviously misguided that I don't even get it. But if you do think arguments aren't evidence, let me know in the comments. But I expect to see evidence for that claim and not arguments. All right, have a good one.